Most people believe losing control happens in loud, dramatic moments, but often it begins quietly, in the small reactions no one else notices. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from watching yourself respond in ways that don't feel like you anymore. If you've ever wondered why your inner world feels so restless even when your life looks fine on the outside, you're not alone. What if the problem isn't that you're too sensitive or too weak, but that you've been trying to force calm instead of inviting it? Sometimes the gentlest approach is the one that finally brings you back to yourself. This is a story about someone who discovered that control doesn't return through pressure, but through patience. He didn't find a grand solution or a dramatic turning point, only a small, almost forgettable shift. Yet that shift changed the way he met anger, rejection, loneliness, and the quiet fear of losing himself. It showed him that the inner world, like anything fragile, responds better to care than command. And once he understood that, everything that once felt chaotic began to move differently. If you've been carrying a storm inside, unsure how to calm it without shutting down parts of yourself, stay for a moment. There's a kind of relief that comes from realizing you don't have to fight your own mind to feel peaceful. You might even notice something soften before this story is over. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped pushing. After all, the way back to yourself is rarely loud or complicated. Sometimes it begins with a single quiet pause you almost overlook. There was a season when Elias felt as if his days were being steered by an unseen hand. He would wake with good intentions, only to find himself snapping at small things by noon. A misplaced word from a stranger could sour the whole afternoon, like a drop of ink in water. At night, he'd replay it all, puzzled at how someone gentle could feel so storm-tossed. It was as though he were a passenger inside his own chest, watching the wheels spin. In his small apartment sat an old music box he'd found at a street market years ago. Lately, it had begun to open on its own, its tiny dancer spinning wildly without melody. Sometimes it clattered so loudly he'd press it shut with both hands, a little embarrassed. Other times he just stared, uneasy, as if it were telling on him in a language he almost knew. He couldn't explain why, but the restless motion felt strangely personal. One evening, after a sharp reply to a friend's harmless joke, he caught his reflection going pale. He hadn't meant to sound cold. The words had simply rushed out ahead of him. The music box sprang open again on the table, rattling like nervous teeth. Elias laughed under his breath, not because it was funny, but because it was too familiar. "All right," he murmured. "Who's really in charge here?" He tried tightening his routines, speaking less, thinking harder before answering anyone. Still, moods slipped through like rain under a door, quiet and persistent. The dancer inside the box kept spinning in frantic little circles, never finishing a turn. Watching it made his shoulders tense, though he couldn't have said why. Somewhere deep down, a softer question began forming, almost shy. What if control wasn't something to grab, but something to invite back gently? He didn't quite believe it yet, but the thought lingered like a warm cup in cold hands. For the first time, he didn't slam the music box shut when it sprang open again. He simply rested his palm beside it, feeling the faint vibration in the wood, and in that small pause, something unfamiliar, almost hopeful, waited to be noticed. The next morning, Elias noticed the music box was already open, though the room was quiet. The dancer moved in uneven jerks, not frantic this time, just tired, as if it had spun all night. He reached to stop it, then hesitated, remembering the strange calm of his hand resting nearby. So instead of forcing the lid down, he pulled up a chair and simply watched. It felt awkward at first, like sitting beside someone crying and not knowing what to say. Minutes passed, and something subtle shifted inside him, a loosening he hadn't planned. The spinning slowed on its own, not perfectly, but enough to soften the sharp ticking sound. He exhaled without realizing he'd been holding his breath, shoulders dropping a fraction. It dawned on him that the box hadn't needed force, it had needed space. The realization was so gentle it almost slipped by unnoticed. Later, when an impatient message buzzed on his phone, the familiar spark of irritation flared. His fingers hovered over the screen, ready to fire back something clipped and defensive. Instead, he set the phone down and placed his hand lightly over the music box. He counted 3 slow breaths, feeling the tiny vibrations settle under his palm. By the third breath, the sharp reply no longer seemed necessary. It puzzled him, this quiet cooperation within himself, as if 2 strangers had agreed to share a bench. He had always believed control meant tightening every bolt, gripping every loose thread. Yet here was another way unfolding. softer but oddly steadier. The dancer inside the box now turned in slow, careful circles, like someone relearning balance. Elias found himself leaning closer, curious rather than afraid. He wondered how many storms he had stirred by trying to silence them too quickly. The thought wasn't heavy, just thoughtful, like noticing a door he'd never opened before. For the first time, the chaos inside didn't feel like an enemy to defeat. It felt more like a frightened companion waiting to be understood. And somewhere beyond that realization, another presence was already approaching. By the end of that week, Elias carried a quiet exhaustion that sleep didn't seem to touch. He smiled when people looked at him, though it felt a bit like holding up a paper lantern in rain. Inside, thoughts darted and collided, leaving him unsure which ones were truly his. Even choosing what to eat felt strangely heavy, as if every small decision echoed too loudly. The music box stayed tucked in his bag now, its faint ticking following him everywhere. At work, a casual remark about a missed detail landed harder than it should have. He nodded politely, but the words replayed all afternoon, sharper each time. By evening, he was convinced everyone had noticed his faltering, though no one said a thing. On the bus ride home, he pressed his hand against the bag, feeling the box shiver inside. It was oddly comforting and unsettling at once, like holding a restless bird. His sister called that night, her voice warm, asking how he'd really been. He almost answered honestly, then heard himself say, "I'm fine, just tired," out of habit. After hanging up, the silence in the room felt heavier than before. The music box clicked open on its own, the dancer spinning in tight, anxious loops. Elias sat on the floor beside it, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. He began to wonder if he was slowly disappearing beneath all those reactions. The person he remembered being, steady, kind, quietly confident, felt far away. In his place was someone jumpy, easily bruised, always bracing for the next small blow. Even kind gestures made him wary, as if they might vanish without warning. The dancer's frantic turning mirrored a fear he hadn't dared to name. That night, he whispered into the dim room, "I think I'm losing myself." The words sounded softer aloud, but no less true. He rested his forehead against the table, listening to the uneven melody. For a moment he imagined what it might feel like if both of them could finally rest. And just then, a gentle knock sounded at his door, quiet but unmistakable. When Elias opened the door, no one was there, just the faint hum of the hallway lights. He almost closed it again when he noticed a small draft slipping past his ankles. Back inside, the music box had shifted to the edge of the table, lid trembling. The dancer spun so fast it blurred, the melody tangling into a thin metallic whine. He had the odd impression that the room itself was holding its breath. He stepped closer, moving slowly, the way one approaches a startled animal. The box jerked in tiny circles, bumping softly against the wood as if trying to flee. Elias placed both hands on the table, not touching it yet, just steadying the surface. "Easy," he murmured, unsure whether he meant the box or himself. The words seemed to soften the air, if only a little. For a moment, he imagined invisible strings tied from the spinning dancer to his chest. Each frantic turn tugged somewhere beneath his ribs, quick and unsettling. He realized how often he'd felt pulled like that, by sharp words, by silence, by doubt. No wonder he was tired. He'd been dancing without ever choosing the music. The thought landed with a strange mix of sadness and relief. He finally rested one fingertip against the side of the box, barely touching it. The vibration traveled through his finger, a tiny storm contained in polished wood. Instead of forcing it still, he matched his breathing to its rhythm, slow and patient. After a few breaths, the spinning eased just enough to become visible again. The dancer wobbled, as if surprised someone was listening rather than commanding. Elias stayed there longer than he meant to, watching the motion grow less frantic. It occurred to him that the chaos had never been random. It had been desperate, like a message repeated too loudly because no one had paused to hear it. He felt a cautious tenderness toward the little object, almost protective now. And somewhere behind him, a calm voice said, "You've already begun." Elias turned, startled, to find an older woman standing just inside the doorway. She carried no urgency with her, only a quiet presence that settled the room. "I knocked earlier," she said gently, as if explaining a small misunderstanding. He couldn't recall letting her in, yet her calm felt oddly familiar, almost welcome. The music box continued its uneven spinning, though not as violently as before. She approached it without reaching out, observing the movement like one studies rain. Most people would have snapped the lid shut, eager to restore silence. Instead, she folded her hands loosely and watched, patient as a winter morning. "Force makes it louder," she said softly, eyes still on the trembling dancer. Elias felt something in his chest loosen at the matter-of-fact kindness in her tone. He admitted, a little embarrassed, that he'd been trying to control it for days. She smiled, not amused, just understanding, the way someone smiles at a child learning balance. "Control isn't taken," she replied. "It's returned when it feels safe to come back." The words landed gently, like a coat placed over cold shoulders. He realized no one had ever spoken about his inner storms without urgency or alarm. She asked him to sit, then guided his hand to rest beside the box, not on it. "Let it know you're here," she said, as if the object could hear through the wood. They sat in silence for a few breaths, the ticking gradually softening between them. Elias noticed he wasn't bracing anymore. His jaw had unclenched without permission. The dancer slowed, not perfectly, but enough to feel less like a warning. After a while, she nodded toward the window, where evening light pooled quietly. "Things calm down when they're no longer afraid of being pushed," she said. Elias followed her gaze, unsure whether she meant the sky, the box, or his own thoughts. For the first time in a long while, he felt curious instead of desperate for answers, and he sensed she hadn't come to fix the chaos, only to show him how to listen. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too Bonus for You. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The woman introduced herself simply as Mira, as though her name were a small cup of tea. She pulled her chair closer, not intruding, just narrowing the distance between calm and confusion. "Watch," she said, her voice soft enough that Elias had to lean in slightly. She didn't touch the music box at first. She only slowed her own breathing. Somehow, the air around them seemed to follow her lead. Then, with a care that felt almost ceremonial, she rested her fingertips near the lid, not pressing down, not restraining, just present, like a hand offered to a skittish horse. The frantic ticking softened into something closer to a rhythm than a warning. Elias blinked, unsure whether the change was real or simply wished for. "Awareness is a kind of gravity," Mira murmured, eyes kind. She guided his hand to mirror hers, their fingers resting on either side of the box. "Don't try to stop it," she whispered. "Just let it know you're not leaving." He swallowed, feeling oddly emotional over something so small and wooden. The dancer's spinning steadied, as if relieved to be seen rather than corrected. For a fleeting moment, the melody returned, fragile, but unmistakably gentle. Mira suggested a tiny practice, almost too simple to believe it mattered. "When the noise rises," she said, "pause and ask what it's afraid of. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a quiet question placed like a lantern." Elias tried it silently, and a wave of tiredness surfaced, honest and unguarded. He hadn't been angry so much as worn thin from holding himself together. The realization didn't overwhelm him. It softened him, the way dusk softens a room. He exhaled, long and slow, and the box answered with a calmer turning. "See?" Mira said, a hint of warmth in her smile. "Compassion travels inward too." Elias felt something align inside, subtle but steady, like a compass finding north, and he sensed this was only the first step of a path he hadn't known existed. In the days that followed, Elias began carrying the music box less like a burden and more like a quiet companion. When irritation flickered, a curt email, a stranger's sigh, a door closed too sharply, he noticed it sooner. His first instinct was still to tense, but now there was a small space before the reaction landed. In that space, he would rest his hand lightly over the box in his pocket and breathe once, slowly. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to remind himself that he didn't have to spin with it. One afternoon, a co-worker's careless comment pricked the old bruise of self-doubt. He felt the familiar rush rising, quick and hot, ready to carry him away. Instead of speaking, he excused himself for a moment and stepped into the stairwell. He touched the cool metal railing, grounding himself, and asked quietly what he needed. The answer came as a whisper, not defense, just a little kindness toward himself. Back at his desk, the words he chose were calmer, almost surprising in their steadiness. The conversation that followed didn't turn into the clash he had expected. It softened, like a knot loosening when no one keeps pulling it tight. Later, he noticed the music box turning in slow, even circles when he opened it. The melody sounded clearer, as though it had found its breath again. He began to trust those small pauses, those brief returns to awareness. They were like stepping stones across a stream that once felt impossible to cross. Not every moment was graceful. Sometimes he still stumbled into old reactions, but now he recognized them sooner, smiling faintly at the familiarity. Change, he realized, wasn't loud. It was patient and quietly persistent. One evening, he caught himself laughing at a mistake that would have once ruined his night. The sound surprised him, light and genuine, like a window opening after winter. He set the music box on the table and watched the dancer move with gentle certainty. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to monitor it constantly, and he wondered how this quiet steadiness would hold when life pressed harder again. A week later, the test arrived quietly, dressed as an ordinary morning. Elias received a message that a project he'd poured himself into had been dismissed. No explanation, just a brief note that it would move forward without him. The old sting of rejection rose instantly, sharp enough to blur the room. For a heartbeat, he felt the familiar urge to shut down or lash out. His hand moved to the music box in his coat pocket, almost on its own. He didn't open it right away. He just held it, feeling the small, steady weight. One breath in, slow enough to notice the tightness in his chest. One breath out, longer, as if making space where the pain had crowded in. By the third breath, the storm inside had edges instead of chaos. He stepped outside, letting the cool air settle his thoughts like dust. Instead of replaying the message, he asked himself what he truly needed. Not vindication, not a clever reply, just reassurance that he was still whole. The realization softened his posture, unclenching something deep in his shoulders. When he finally opened the box, the dancer turned in calm, measured arcs. Later, he responded with a simple, respectful message, nothing defensive hidden between the lines. To his surprise, the reply he received was warmer, almost apologetic. What might have become a quiet feud dissolved into a conversation instead. He sensed how easily the old version of him would have fueled the fire. Now it felt like guiding a fragile flame rather than being burned by it. That evening, he placed the music box by the window, watching the last light fade. The melody drifted through the room, steady as a heartbeat at rest. He realized control hadn't meant silencing the hurt, only choosing how to carry it. The calm he felt wasn't forced. It had grown from those small, patient moments, and he wondered how many other storms might pass if met the same way. One quiet afternoon, Mira returned, finding Elias by the window with the music box resting open. She noticed the steadiness in the melody before she noticed anything else. Without a word, she sat beside him, sharing the silence like an old ritual. After a while, she asked softly, "Would you like to know how to keep this with you?" Elias nodded, a little wary of how simple the answer might sound. She told him that whenever the inner noise swells, he could pause wherever he is. Not dramatically, even in the middle of a crowded room or a tense conversation. Just 3 slow breaths, as if he were gently lifting the lid of the box inside his chest. On the third breath, a quiet question, "What do I truly need right now?" She said the body often answers before the mind has time to argue. To show him, she asked him to close the music box for a moment and wait. The sudden silence felt strange, like a pause in a familiar song. Then she invited him to open it slowly while breathing out, not rushing the motion. The dancer resumed its turning, calm and unhurried, as if following his pace. Elias felt a small smile tug at his mouth, surprised at how doable it was. Mira added that sometimes the answer would be rest, sometimes reassurance. Other times it might simply be permission to feel without fixing anything. She suggested writing one honest sentence when the day feels heavy. Not a page, not a plan, just a single line placed somewhere safe. "Tiny doors," she said, "are often easier for the heart to walk through." As the afternoon light thinned, Elias practiced once more, quietly, without her prompting. 3 breaths, one gentle question, a moment of listening without pressure. He noticed how the room seemed to lean into the calm he created. The music box answered with its soft, even melody, almost approving, and he sensed that this small ritual was preparing him for something deeper still. On Mira's last visit before winter, she found Elias sitting peacefully, hands wrapped around a warm cup. The music box rested open beside him, its melody steady enough to blend with the quiet room. She didn't comment on the change. She simply nodded, as if recognizing a familiar landscape. Outside, the wind moved through the trees without disturbing their rooted calm. It felt like watching someone who had finally learned the language of stillness. Elias admitted that the chaos hadn't vanished. It still visited now and then, but it no longer arrived like a conqueror. It came more like weather passing through. He had stopped trying to win against it, choosing instead to guide it gently onward. The dancer inside the box moved with a grace that felt earned rather than forced. He realized patience had become a kind of quiet authority within him. Mira said the inner world softens when it trusts the one who leads it, not through strict commands, but through steady presence and care. She compared it to holding a frightened bird. Too tight and it panics, too loose and it flees. Elias listened, sensing the truth settle somewhere deeper than thought. For once, control felt less like effort and more like harmony. That evening after she left, he carried the music box to the small park nearby. He placed it on the bench beside him, letting the melody mingle with distant laughter. A child ran past, stumbled, then stood again, brushing off the fall with quiet determination. Elias smiled, recognizing the same gentle resilience growing in himself. The world didn't seem softer. He had simply learned how to meet it. As the sky darkened, he closed the lid slowly, not to silence it, but to rest it. The quiet that followed felt full rather than empty, like a calm sea at dusk. He sat there a while longer, hands resting loosely, breath unhurried. For the first time, nothing inside him demanded immediate attention. And in that quiet mastery, a new beginning waited, patient and unafraid.